I bought the thrift store art that no one wanted, the outdated, faded, and ugly pieces. And I'm not just repurposing the frames, I'm completely reworking the art itself. So today I'm taking 15 of the worst pieces I could find and giving them a second chance. I'm starting with quick and easy fixes and working up to more creative and unexpected transformations. So make sure you stick around for number 15 because that one is totally outside the box. The first project started with this sweet little chipmunk print I found for $3.99. I loved the vintage look of it, but that frame wasn't doing it any favors. It was one of those plain modern black frames, you know, the kind you see everywhere. I was surprised to see that the art was actually an educational poster dated 1971. I had thrifted this vintage frame with bubble glass a while back and had been saving it for just the right project. And I thought the chipmunk would be perfect. So I trimmed the print down to fit the frame's unusual shape. And since there weren't any nails or staples to hold it in place, I just used some paper packing tape on the back to secure it. I was attracted to this pretty colorful floral print, but I thought $5.99 was overpriced because if you look closely, you can see that the paper is wrinkled. But I had an idea for smoothing those wrinkles out and giving this print a much more elevated look. This modern wood frame seemed completely wrong for a floral print based on an 18th century painting. So once again, I went to my stash and pulled out a vintage frame that I had previously thrifted. It didn't have a backing, so I just reused the cardboard from the modern frame and trimmed it down to fit inside the vintage one. Then I trimmed the print to the same size. Since I wasn't using glass in this frame, I brushed a coat of Mod Podge right over the print to protect it. And those visible brush strokes actually help it look more like a real painting instead of just a paper print. Once the Mod Podge was completely dry, I flipped the print over and lightly sprayed the back with adhesive. Then I attached it to the cardboard backing and rolled over it with a brayer to smooth everything out. That took care of the wrinkles and gave it a nice flat finish. Once again, there were no staples or nails to hold the backing in place, so I just ran paper packing tape along all four sides of the cardboard to secure it. This next piece honestly wasn't that bad. It just screamed generic, mass produced artwork, and I thought we could do better. When I take a frame apart, I try to remove the craft paper from the back in one big piece so that I can reuse it later. When I saw the foam board inside, I automatically assumed that both the print and the mat had been glued to it, which is common with mass produced art. But thankfully, on this one, only the mat was attached, which left me with a nice paper print to work with. I had also thrifted this $2 metal frame and thought it coordinated nicely with the rose print. I decided to use the lower half of the print, and I trimmed it to fit the new frame. Then I adhered it right over the existing print using spray adhesive. Then I brushed over parts of the frame with gold rub and buff to highlight the gold background of the print. I still had the top half of the print left and decided to use it on a small Dollar Tree wooden box. To adhere it, I use spray adhesive because glossy paper like this tends to wrinkle if you use a water-based product like Mod Podge. To finish off the box, I painted the sides and inside with chalk paint. Then I lightly distressed the box and the print and applied a light coat of antiquing wax, wiping most of it back. This print of a Renoir painting looks so sad and cheap and was priced at only $1.44. Lucky for us, I had a nice mat and frame left over from the previous project. I could have just reframed it and called it good, but Renoir deserves more than that. So let's color drench the mat and the frame using a color from the print. I chose a dusty blue, Waverly's Night Sky chalk paint. To avoid brush strokes, I used a foam roller to paint the mat. Once the paint was dry, I taped the print to the back of the mat and put everything back together. Before we jump into the next project, I want to thank HomeAglow for sponsoring today's video. As you guys know, my house was recently filmed to be featured on the Homeworthy YouTube channel and website. And as you also know, I was really stressing about it because I wanted my house to look perfect. I wanted to focus on finishing up some DIY projects, styling, and all those last-minute details, not scrubbing floors and baseboards. So I booked a cleaning with HomeAglow, and having someone else clean my house really did reduce my stress level. If you're not familiar with them, HomeAglow is a top-rated home service platform that makes it super easy for you to book a trusted cleaner in your area. Everything is done online. You choose your date, how many hours you need, and you can browse reviews, photos, and ratings from background-checked cleaners before booking. I'm very budget conscious, so I recommend checking out the Forever Clean membership. It saves you $30 an hour on all future cleanings, and you can book unlimited cleanings starting as low as $19 an hour. Even after that first cleaning, the membership practically pays for itself. And you can log on anytime and adjust your schedule or cancel. So if you want to take home cleaning off your plate this year, or just prepare for a special event, head to homeaglow.com/Canterbury or scan the QR code on the screen and you'll get your first 3 hours of cleaning for just $19. I love a round or oval frame, even if it's an old word sign. I think this one was someone's DIY project because the vinyl lettering was very easy to pull off. The white background paired with the rustic wood was giving off farmhouse vibes. So I painted over the white with black chalk paint to give it a more elegant, updated look. And since botanicals are so popular right now, I grabbed a hydrangea that I had recently pressed from a bouquet my husband sent me, and I hot glued it in the center of the wood round. Then I added a bow made from a strip of thrifted vintage lace. I hadn't yet sealed the chalk paint because I wanted to attach the flowers before applying any wax, so I just brushed around the perimeter of the wood round. This next piece was definitely one of the ugliest prints at the thrift store. I was even a little embarrassed to be seen buying it. And this was one of those mass produced pictures where everything is glued together. I had hoped to save the mat, but there was just no way to remove it in one piece. So I pulled out a small, solid wood frame that I had thrifted for $1.99. Using the glass from that frame as a guide, I cut out a section of the print with a utility knife. I don't think it really comes across on camera just how garish these colors are. So, to tone them down and give them an aged appearance, I brushed on a coat of water based antiquing wax. Then I came back with a paper towel and began dabbing it off until I achieved a look I liked. I let the wax dry for a few hours. Then I reassembled the frame, but I did not replace the glass. The wax not only subdues the colors, but it protects the paper and creates the look of an original painting. I also brushed some dark wax on the wood frame to freshen it up and conceal any small scratches. I absolutely love how vintage this looks. I still had plenty of that ugly picture left, so I decided to crop out my favorite part, the little swan figurine. I wanted to use an old round frame that I had, and so I found a lid that matched the size of the frame and traced around it so that I could cut it out with a pair of heavy duty scissors. Next, I aged it with a little antiquing wax, just like I did with the rose print. I brushed it on, dabbed most of it back off, and once it was dry, I placed it in the old frame. Since the frame didn't have a backing, I cut another piece of cardboard to slip in behind the print to help hold everything in place. If you like the size and shape of ceramic plaques like this one, don't pass them by. They're actually so easy to repurpose. Just remove the hanging hardware and flip it over. Most of the time, the back is a clean slate just waiting to be embellished. Once the back is cleaned up, you can add whatever you like. And since I like birds, I'm going to apply an IOD rub-on transfer from the Catarina package. And it adhered so easily and perfectly. Because I like the back to look finished too, I painted over the original design with a couple coats of ivory chalk paint. Then, instead of reattaching the leather tie, I added a coordinating ribbon for hanging. Since painted ceramic scratches fairly easily, I decided I better protect it with a coat of Mod Podge on the back. This next piece of wall art might actually be even uglier than that garish rose print. In the center was a printed piece of plexiglass that said, "Relax," but I couldn't relax until that entire design was gone. So I used a little goof off to soften it up, then carefully scraped it off with a razor blade. I could have replaced the insert altogether, but I really wanted to challenge myself and see if I could make that plexiglass work. So I chose a floral rub on transfer from IOD's Clementine set and applied it to the front. The frame was covered in paper that looked like rustic wood planks. So I lightly sanded it with my orbital sander to rough up the surface before adding something new. Then I sprayed adhesive on both the paper and on the back of a piece of scrapbook paper. I pressed the paper onto the front and rolled over it with a brayer to make sure it adhered really well. Then I used a utility knife to carefully trim away the excess paper from the center opening and around the outer edges. Once most of it was removed, I went back over all the edges with a sanding block to clean up any little bits and give it a more natural, finished look. I decided to use a coordinating piece of scrapbook paper to cover the center square, since you could still see it even with the plexiglass in place. So I cut it to size and adhered it with spray adhesive. Then I just popped the plexiglass back in the frame. I thrifted this old home interiors print in a burgundy frame, and it just screams 1990s. As I began taking it apart, I was hoping the print and mat were not glued to the cardboard backing, but no such luck. Before tearing off the mat, I scored the print along the edge of the mat so that the print wouldn't rip when I pulled it off. I had thrifted a moss covered styrofoam wreath form for just 99 cents, and I hoped to use it as an unusual picture frame. I placed it on the print in a way that would feature the landscape rather than the woman. Then I traced around it and cut out the circle with heavy duty scissors. After removing the wreath paper backing, I used hot glue to attach it to the cardboard print. I also added some staples just to make sure it stayed put. I think the plain wreath looks nice, but I can't leave it plain, especially since I have a large stash of faux flowers. I chose some lavender, pink, and blue flowers to reflect the colors of the print, just cutting down the stems and pushing them into the styrofoam. I also hot glued some moss clumps over and in between the stems to further secure them in place. When arranging flowers, I like to have something tall in back and something droopy along the front bottom. Other than that, I just play around with the arrangement until I like it. Once I was happy with this arrangement, I created a hanger at the top by hot gluing a loop of ribbon to the back of the cardboard. Although these cast iron trivets can be used as hot pads, many people, like me, use them as kitchen decor. You can easily update the design on the ceramic tile if you don't like it, and in a way that won't damage the tile itself. Cut a little batting to fit over the tile, then cut a small piece of scrap fabric. I'm using a piece cut from a thrift store curtain. Trim the fabric to slightly larger than the tile and place the tile face down on the fabric, with the batting sandwiched in between. Cut slits around the edges of the fabric and then fold the flaps over to the back of the tile and hot glue them in place. To clean up the bottom, I cut a circle from a piece of cardstock and hot glued it over the fabric edges on the back of the tile. For an extra embellishment, I glued some braided ribbon around the sides of the tile. Then I just hot glued the tile back into the cast iron trivet. And for a final touch, I added a bow to the handle. Like the home interiors picture, these floral prints weren't terrible. They were just really generic. So let's take them apart and give them some personality. Patterned mats are really popular right now. So I found a piece of scrapbook paper with a floral pattern that I thought looked nice with the prints. Unfortunately, the prints were adhered to foam board and there was no additional cardboard backing. So I decided to use the glass for the back. I cut my scrapbook paper to fit and adhered it directly to the glass with spray adhesive. Even though it looks like the prints have a mat, they don't. It's just the way the image was printed on the paper. So I used a metal ruler and a utility knife to cut off that fake matte border. Then I used a sanding block to smooth the foam board edges. I used clear glue to attach the foam board to the paper covered glass. I used regular glue rather than hot glue because I wanted to have time to adjust the foam board and make sure it was centered on the glass. I let the glue dry overnight, and the next day I reassembled the frames. I needed to cut out a piece of cardboard to place behind the glass so everything would fit in the frame properly. Then I just used some paper packing tape along the edges to clean up the back. I wanted to add another dimensional item, so I pulled out my Dollar Tree butterfly stickers. I like to trim off the excess transparency around the edges so they look a little less like stickers. Then I just use a drop of hot glue on the body to attach them. I'm sure these four blocks that spell out fall were once considered cute, but since I thrifted the set for just $2.99, even the Goodwill employees thought they looked dated. So let's give them a quick fix by covering them with leftover wallpaper scraps. I wanted to use this William Morris wallpaper, but I only had enough to cover three of the blocks. So we'll do something different with the fourth one. I tried to arrange the wallpaper to feature a prominent design on each block, but since I was using scraps, I didn't have a lot of options. So I cut out a few extra images to add in selected spots. Since this is peel and stick wallpaper, it was super easy to apply. After trimming off the excess, I ran a sanding block along the sides to create a more natural looking edge. Although I was happy with how they looked, I thought a little antiquing wax would make them look a little more like vintage art and less like wallpaper. But if you prefer the brighter colors, just skip this step. Now, what to do with that fourth block? Although it may look like a solid piece of wood, it's actually a hollow box. And I thought it would be fun to create a hole in the center. So I marked the center and drilled a hole in that spot. And then I drew a larger circle around that. I was going to use the hole as a starting spot for my jigsaw, but it's really cold in my garage right now. So I grabbed my Dremel instead and used that to cut out along my pencil line. My jigsaw would definitely have cut out a cleaner circle, but it didn't look too bad after I sanded the edges. I wanted to place moss inside the box to create a tiny hidden garden, so I hot glued individual clumps to the back wall. I also hot glued a piece of styrofoam along the bottom edge of the circle as support for other things I might want to add. But first, I wanted to decoupage a napkin to the front to add a pattern to that plain brown box. I brushed on an even coat of Mod Podge over the box and then pressed just the top pattern ply of the napkin into the Mod Podge, smoothing out any wrinkles with my fingers. Then I applied a top coat of Mod Podge to seal the napkin. Once the Mod Podge was dry, I used a sanding block to remove the excess napkin along the sides and inside the circle. Then I hot glued a moss covered wire around the circle, which not only cleans up the cut wood edges, but also contributes to that garden theme. I found a green piece of bark like material in the bag of moss and hot glued that to the styrofoam to create a little shelf. I also glued some dried mushrooms to the box. I found these in my yard last fall. Then I filled in with some faux greenery and dried flowers. I just wasn't loving the look of the decoupage napkin, and I thought that I might have a leftover piece of scrapbook paper that looked like birch bark. I found two small pieces, and I thought if I tore them into a few smaller sections, I should have enough to cover the front of the box. I removed the mushrooms and protected the moss with a paper towel. Then I used spray adhesive and applied the paper directly over the sealed napkin. I immediately liked this so much better. Unfortunately, I didn't do a great job of cutting around the moss covered wire. So I cut up a few clumps of moss into thin strips and hot glued those around the circle opening. This worked so well. You really don't need to use that wire for this project. My miniature garden needed something else, and I wanted to add a bird, but I challenged myself to use something different. I found a mushroom Christmas ornament in my stash that I thought would look cute, so I just used some wire snips to cut off the metal ring at the top. Then I pulled out the straw flowers and added the mushroom inside instead. I hunted through my miniatures and found a small squirrel, and he fit perfectly under the mushroom. Then I just added some tiny faux flowers on the opposite side of the mushroom to balance out the arrangement. Which of today's ideas was your favorite? I hope you'll let me know. And if you want some unique ideas for repurposing those picture frames, here's another video I think you'll like. Thanks so much for watching today. Hope to see you next week.